You found a solicitation on Sam.Gov, and now it's time to write a proposal. But how do I write a proposal? There are 100 little rules and 100 little things that could kill your proposal before you even get it off the ground. In this module, I'm going to show you how to read the solicitation, the request for proposal, in the same way that a government evaluator is actually going to score it and decide if it wins or not. I'm going to show you how to build a simple outline in a first pass compliance matrix. By the end, you'll be able to build a simple outline in a compliance matrix so you can avoid the traps that even smart teams that have been doing this for a while fall into when they're writing proposals to win government contracts. And here's a quick note. I never tell anyone to just go find solicitations and write proposals. If you've watched my channel, you know that most contracts are won sometimes months or years before a solicitation even comes out. There's a whole market research phase that comes before the solicitation. So if you're watching this, my hope is that you have been working an opportunity, whether you identified something as a source is sought, you found an opportunity in acquisitions forecast, setting up meetings with the government, working it through all of the steps that we talk about in our other videos to the point where a solicitation finally comes out. So this is the end, but it is one of the most important things to get right. A lot of companies have failed at the very end when the solicitation comes out because they didn't put enough care and attention into writing a proposal for an RFP. So I'm going to make sure that you know how to do that correctly. Why do proposals even exist? And what are evaluators actually looking for? Look, the U.S. federal government runs on rules, and federal contracting is probably the most complicated and painful example of all of these rules. These rules exist to ensure that there is competition among companies that are going after solicitations to win contracts. If you're responding to an RFP, then these award decisions are going to be based on evaluation factors and significant sub-factors. When you're in the proposal writing stage, it's essential that you actually start digging into what is often referred to as the FAR, but what that acronym stands for is the Federal Acquisitions Regulations. I want you to go look at the Federal Acquisitions Regulations. You can go to acquisitions.gov and you can pull it up there. There's probably several other places that you can look at the FAR proposals concerned, because you might have the best product or service on earth, but if you mess up just one of the evaluation details or you don't understand one of the FAR clauses, you could lose the entire contract. So we want to make sure that we are being very, very accurate here. So I want you to look up FAR 15.304, so 15.304. Now, many offerers, many companies are going to write a proposal. They read the solicitation that the government puts out from front to back, and then they just start writing. So they miss the one truth that governs the entire process, Section L. Now, Section L is going to tell you how to submit the proposal. Section M is something else you want to pay particular attention to. This tells you how the federal government is going to score the proposal. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull Section L and Section M. We're going to use Section L as the outline of your proposal. So this is where the outline comes from. So where do you find Section L and Section M? So when you go to Sam.Gov and you find the RFP, there are going to be some instructions and overviews right on the page you go to. Now you may see Section L and Section M embedded in an attachment that you can download from Sam.Gov, but you may not see anything called L and M if you're looking at a RFP, right? Request for proposal. So we're not looking at a request for quote. This is an RFP. So now you're thinking, Rick, there's no L, there's no M, you're full of it. Why don't you just pause? And now sometimes, because these solicitations are written by people and they're not the same people, they may be using different terminology. So you can look for instruction to offerers. You can look for evaluation factors. So instruction to offerers would just be an alternate way of defining Section L, and evaluation factors would just be an alternate way of saying Section M. Okay, if you don't see the alphabet soup, that's okay, but we're looking for the instructions to offers and we're looking for the evaluation factors, and we're going to pull those out. That's step one. When you have downloaded Section L and Section M, I want you to take a highlighter, and anytime you see language that says shall, must, will, any words like that, you want to highlight those. Anytime you see that, those are things that you are going to have to adhere to, whether it's the instructions or the evaluation factors. These are going to come into play later, and you can highlight that while I cover the next topic, because you may have heard me mention that we're talking about a request for proposal, an RFP, not a request for quote, RFQ. Well, Rick, I'm looking at an RFQ, so what are you talking about? When you're responding to an RFP, this offer is called a proposal. When you are responding to an RFQ, this is not a proposal. This is a quote, price quote. And a quote is not an offer. What does that mean? What's the difference? Here's the difference. When you respond to an RFQ, you are just giving the government a quote on products or services, but a contract is not going to be awarded off of that. What the government does is then they produce an order. So if they like your quote, they will order something from you. Hey, here is the order, Mr. Contractor. And then you do not have a contract until you accept that order. Okay, so this is a big difference. The reason I'm bringing up RFQ during this proposal writing process is a lot of teams will take their RFP habits and principles and just, without even thinking about them, they'll use the exact same, templates and their strategies for an RFQ. I just want you to be aware, if you are responding to an RFQ, you want that RFQ response to be crisp, clean, straight to the point, especially when we are talking about how much narrative to include. RFQs are governed by FAR Part 13. RFPs are governed by a different part of the Federal Acquisitions Regulations. That's Part 15. A good rule of thumb is when you're writing an RFQ, we're not writing a novel there. On the other hand, we may be writing a novel for the RFP, depending on how big it is. Okay, so now you have Section L all highlighted like we talked about earlier. What are we going to do with that? When you open Section L, you want to mirror its order exactly for your headings and your subheadings in the outline you're putting together for your proposal. So I'm going to read this. Section L says Volume 1, Technical. Volume 2, Management. Volume 3, Past Performance. Volume 4, Price or Cost. Then that's your skeleton, right? That's how we're going to do this. It always bugs me a little bit when people are selling proposal templates or giving the how-to on writing proposals. I want to be very specific. Every solicitation is different, right? So we really have to, before we start writing, doing anything, we really have to understand what is the government asking for, and that's going to potentially change around the entire structure of our proposal. So Section L, and let's mirror what it says in there and make that our outline. Now here's a big takeaway that most people are not going to tell you. And keep in mind, I was on the government side, right? So I was a program manager for the Air Force, and my team would put out solicitations. We have contracting officers, program managers, engineers. We have a lot of people on these teams, and that's important because very often it is not just one person that is reviewing your proposal. Often those sections we just talked about are going to get split up and sent to different teams of people to review them. And so remember this, each section has to stand on its own. Many companies make the mistake of packing a bunch of qualifying data into the executive summary or into the past performance section, assuming that everybody is going to read the proposal in its entirety. And very often that is not the case. Okay, so if you have critical information that a team that's scoring, say your pricing section, your technical section, you're going to want to have all of that information in there. Each section has to stand on its own. You have to assume the person reviewing Section 1 isn't going to see the introduction, the summary, or any of the other sections. Okay, Rick, what do you really mean by that? Section M, right? So Section M has all of the qualifying factors and sub-factors that you're going to need, right? So you want to make sure that if you have to hit all of those, which you do, you want to make sure you're writing to those factors and sub-factors in each of the sections. Now, we'll reinforce that in future modules and make sure this passes the common sense test. So if you happen to have some factors and sub-factors in Section M that just don't make sense being in the section you're writing, great. But the point is each section is standalone. Let's make sure that we are writing those as completely as possible so we have the big picture and we're answering all of the government's asks. Okay, now we're going to go back to Section L and Section M and any other attachments there are, right? So when I said I want you to highlight shall, will, must, these type of statements, okay, make sure you're looking at everything, right? And you have them all written down so you know what the government's asking for. Often what a company will do is they'll pay attention to the narrative format or what's required in the technical section. But what they're ignoring are some really big gotchas. And this is what I mean by that. Size of font, type of font, how many pages, what's the limitation? These are basic. We need to follow the instructions. And from the government standpoint, keep in mind, I was on the government side of this before I was on the civilian commercial side of this. If you as a company cannot follow simple instructions, how many pages, what type of font, what size of font, then how could I expect you to follow much more complicated instructions if you're building a building for us, or a piece of technology, or something that's going to be with a warfighter. So remember, if you can't do the simple things, then the government's not going to have faith in you to do the hard things. Nobody said writing a proposal is easy. Writing a proposal is a pain. This is why I tell people to avoid any type of strategy that involves them just finding a solicitation and trying to write a proposal. They turn into proposal writing factories. And writing a proposal is hard. It is a discipline. And if you actually understand it and can do it well, you could get paid just to write proposals, right? So if you're a company, you don't want to take the time involved to write a proposal unless you have very, very high potential of win on this solicitation. I'm going to go through some of the things that companies often miss, just so you know what to look out for. File names, naming conventions, fonts, margins, portal rules, compliance, file types, page limits, volume, line spacing. Any of these things could potentially end up getting your proposal rejected because you didn't follow the rules. And by the way, if you are watching this in our GovClose certification program, make sure you grab all of the handouts and supported materials. And of course, we have several modules through this proposal writing program. If you're interested in taking our proposal writing course on its own, just let us know in the comments. But anybody in the GovClose certification program, which is our flagship certification program, they'll get all of the modules, the entire proposal writing program. All right, let's break down an actual example. So in this example, section L requires a 10-page technical volume, and it specifies 2 tasks. Section M scores understanding, approach, and risk. So your outline becomes H1, heading 1, task 1, approach, task 2, approach, each with subheadings, understanding, method, tools, risk and mitigation, measures. All right, let's use a real-world example. Section L, and you're reading the solicitation, you pull out L and M just like we talked about. Section L says that you are required to have a 10-page technical volume, and there are going to be 2 tasks evaluated. Section M says it scores understanding, approach, and risk. So now what you're going to have is a tech volume with task 1, a tech volume with task 2. And under each of those, you're going to have the evaluated areas in section M. So the understanding, the approach. So it might be understanding, method, tools, risks and mitigations, measures. This way evaluators can read the way that you write your technical volume, and they're going to go, okay, here's the first task. And then you're going to identify where section M said it's going to be evaluated, the understanding, the approach, the risk, and you put it right in their face. Don't be coy about it. So now if I'm evaluating it, okay, yep, right here. 1, 2, 3. That's for number 1, and 1, 2, 3. That's for task number 2. The compliance matrix that you've built is going to show exactly where each of those requirements are in your proposal. So what I recommend is that you outline them all in the compliance matrix, and then you put, okay, this is going to be found on page 3 of my proposal, paragraph 3. This is on page 4. And if you're keeping that compliance matrix, you can build it in a spreadsheet if you want to. That's what's going to keep you on track to make sure you're hitting all of the points. Okay, so this was section number 1 of writing a proposal. Now, if you are in our program, you'll have the 10-minute checklist associated with this, and then the example of the compliance matrix as well, and then reference pointers. And for anyone watching this, if it's on YouTube or somewhere else, look at FAR Part 15 very, very closely. I would read that over and over again. Same with FAR Part 13 if you're responding to RFQs instead of requests for proposals, which is going to be 15. Now in the next section, what we're going to go over is how to actually make a go, no-go decision on this. So you can see we're going through these things pretty detailed to decide if we're even going to write the proposal. We've built a compliance matrix. As you go through this, you may find things that are going to prohibit you from actually selling to the government. So you want to identify those things early, and we're going to show you exactly how to do that in the next module.